Commander Jake Martinez walked slowly through the massive hangar bay of Luna Station and felt his heart sink with each step he took toward the twisted metal that lay before him. The alien wreckage stretched across the floor like the skeleton of some ancient beast that had died in terrible pain. 3 years had passed since humanity first met the Keltheran Empire, and this was what they called a diplomatic gift. The Keltherans had arrived in ships that gleamed like cut diamonds and spoke with voices that sounded like breaking glass. Their bodies were covered in crystalline plates that shifted color when they moved, and each of them had 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut steel. Ambassador Zektal had presented the wreckage with what humans could only guess was a smile, though it looked more like a sneer to Jake. The alien diplomat had explained through mechanical translators that this was a relic of the Nexari civilization, and that these dead aliens had once dared to challenge Keltheran power. The message was clear without being spoken directly. This broken ship was what happened to species that thought they could stand against the Crystal Warriors, and humanity should learn from the Nexari mistake. Dr. Lisa Chen knelt beside a section of hull that seemed to shimmer, even though there was no light source nearby to make it do so. She was Earth's best expert on alien technology, and had spent her entire career studying things that should not exist. Her hands moved carefully over the strange metal surface as she recorded everything she saw with instruments that barely worked on materials this advanced. The ship was enormous, and would have been impressive when it was whole. Nearly 2 kilometers of twisted corridors and broken chambers spread across the hangar floor, and every surface was covered with patterns that hurt to look at directly. The designs seemed to move when nobody was watching them, and changed shape depending on the angle from which they were viewed. Chief Engineer Ryan Brooks stood at what had once been the ship's command center and shook his head in amazement. The control systems were unlike anything humans had ever built and used principles that their best scientists could barely understand. Crystalline matrices grew from metal bases like frozen trees, and energy still pulsed through circuits that should have been dead for centuries. Jake approached the largest intact section of the wreckage and placed his hand against the hull. The metal felt warm and seemed to respond to his touch by growing slightly brighter. Something about the ship called to him in a way that he could not explain, and he found himself thinking about possibilities rather than problems. Dr. Chen stood up from her examination and walked over to where Jake was standing. Her face showed excitement despite the terrible condition of the alien technology. She had found something that made her believe this wreckage was more than just broken metal and circuits. The hull material was impossible, according to everything humans knew about physics. It could shift between solid and liquid states depending on electromagnetic fields, and seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at the same time. Sensors showed that parts of the ship were there and not there simultaneously, which should have been completely impossible. Ryan joined them at the hull section and pointed to a series of conduits that disappeared into what appeared to be solid metal. The ship's power systems operated on principles that violated known laws of physics, and the propulsion system seemed to bend space and time around itself. Everything about the Nexari technology was designed to work in ways that human science said could never work. Jake made a decision that would change everything for humanity, though he did not know it at the time. Instead of trying to worship the alien technology like the Keltherans expected, or giving up because it was too complex, he decided that humans would study every piece of the wreckage until they understood how it worked. Then they would make it work for them. Dr. Chen began documenting every fragment of the ship with a thoroughness that bordered on obsession. She cataloged each circuit pattern and measured every energy reading while Ryan started mapping the ship's systems, even though most of them were damaged beyond repair. They worked with a determination that surprised even themselves. The research team grew larger as more specialists arrived from Earth. Physicists and engineers and computer experts all came to Luna Station to study the impossible ship. They set up laboratories around the wreckage and began the slow process of understanding technology that was thousands of years ahead of human development. Jake watched his people work and felt proud of their refusal to be intimidated by the challenge. Humans had always been good at taking things apart to see how they worked, and this alien ship was just a bigger puzzle than they usually faced. The fact that it came from beings who had lost a war against the Keltherans only made them more determined to succeed where the Nexari had failed. Dr. Chen made the first real breakthrough when she successfully activated a small section of the ship's hull. The metal suddenly became transparent and then faded from view completely before returning to normal visibility. The entire research team gathered around to watch as she repeated the process and proved that human technology could interface with Nexari systems. The implications were staggering, and everyone in the hangar understood that they had just taken the first step towards something incredible. If humans could learn to control the phasing technology, then they would have capabilities that no other species in the galaxy possessed. Ships that could become invisible and weapons that could strike from dimensions that enemies could not even detect. Jake felt a surge of excitement as he realized what the Keltherans had actually given humanity. They thought they were providing a lesson about the futility of challenging their empire, but instead they had handed over the keys to technologies that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. The Crystal Warriors had made a mistake that would cost them everything, though they did not know it yet. Unknown to the human research team, Keltheran spy networks were monitoring their progress through sensors hidden throughout Luna Station. Intelligence reports flowed back to the Empire describing how the primitive humans were experimenting with forces beyond their comprehension. The Keltheran leadership dismissed these reports as evidence of human foolishness and predicted that the dangerous aliens would soon destroy themselves with their own curiosity. Ambassador Sektel received regular updates about the human research efforts and felt satisfied that his gift was serving its intended purpose. The Wreckage would either teach humanity proper respect for Keltheran power or eliminate them as a potential threat when their experiments inevitably failed. Either outcome would be acceptable to the Crystal Empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. Jake Martinez stood in the hangar as his shift ended and looked one more time at the alien wreckage that was already beginning to change human history. Tomorrow they would learn more about how the Nexari technology worked, and eventually they would make it work better than its original creators had ever imagined. The Keltherans had given them the bones of their ancient enemies, and humans would use those bones to build something that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the first successful activation of the Nexari hull section, and Luna Station had transformed into something that barely resembled its original design. Dr. Tony Garcia stood in the expanded research complex and watched as teams of scientists worked around massive pieces of alien technology that hummed with barely contained energy. The facility now stretched across 3 asteroid-sized modules connected by pressurized tunnels that allowed researchers to move between different sections of the wreckage without losing momentum in their studies. Marine Colonel Kate Williams walked beside Tony as they toured the latest additions to the research labs. Her military background made her naturally suspicious of technology that seemed too good to be true, and the Nexari systems definitely fell into that category. Every breakthrough came with unexpected problems, and every solution created 3 new challenges that nobody had anticipated. The team had learned that the alien ship was not just advanced technology, but something that actively adapted and evolved based on its environment. The crystalline circuits grew new connections when exposed to different energy patterns, and the hull material changed its properties depending on what was happening around it. The ship seemed to be alive in ways that human science could not explain. Captain Alex Rivera had volunteered to test the first experimental flight suit that used Nexari interface technology. The suit was designed to connect directly with the alien systems and allow a human pilot to control devices that had been built for a completely different species. Alex strapped himself into the testing chair and activated the neural link that would connect his mind to the alien circuits. The pain hit him immediately and felt like lightning running through every nerve in his body. The Nexari interface was designed for minds that worked differently than human brains, and the connection process nearly killed him before Dr. Garcia could shut down the system. Alex spent 3 days in the medical bay recovering from neural feedback that should have been impossible to survive. Dan Foster was one of the promising young scientists who had joined the research team after graduating at the top of his class in theoretical physics. He was working on power conduit analysis when a feedback surge overloaded the experimental systems and sent energy coursing through equipment that was not designed to handle Nexari power levels. The explosion threw him across the lab and left him with burns that took weeks to heal properly. Several other researchers suffered similar injuries as the team pushed the boundaries of what human technology could safely interface with alien systems. The Nexari technology seemed to fight against human attempts to understand it and sabotaged experiments in ways that suggested malicious intelligence rather than simple incompatibility. Tony Garcia refused to give up despite the mounting casualties and setbacks. He developed new approaches that treated the alien technology as a partner rather than a tool to be controlled. Instead of trying to force human systems to work with Nexari circuits, he began designing hybrid technologies that combined the best of both civilizations. Dr. Ben Clark made the first major breakthrough in manufacturing when he successfully grew crystalline circuits using modified human technology. His process involved exposing silicon-based computer chips to energy fields generated by Nexari power cores, and the results were beyond anything the team had hoped to achieve. The hybrid circuits were faster and more efficient than either human or alien technology alone. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source when maintenance worker Lucy Torres accidentally spilled coffee on a control interface that had been frustrating researchers for months. The caffeine in the coffee created a chemical reaction with the alien materials that made them suddenly responsive to human neural patterns. Lucy became an instant hero when her accident led to the development of safe human-compatible interface systems. The discovery that human biochemistry could enhance Nexari technology opened up possibilities that nobody had imagined. Coffee became a standard component in interface designs, and researchers began experimenting with other human substances that might improve compatibility. The aliens had built their technology for their own biology, but humans were finding ways to make it work better for human needs. Intelligence reports from Commander Sam Parker brought disturbing news about Keltheran activities in human space. The Crystal Warriors were conducting what they called routine patrols, but their ships were clearly gathering intelligence about human capabilities. Diplomatic communications from Ambassador Zektal had become increasingly hostile and demanding. The Keltheran diplomat now insisted on inspecting human research facilities and claimed that humanity was conducting dangerous experiments with unstable technology. His requests became more aggressive each week and included veiled threats about the consequences of refusing Keltheran oversight. The Crystal Empire was obviously becoming concerned about human progress. With the Nexari Wreckage Colonel Williams increased security around Luna Station and established protocols for protecting the research from alien surveillance. Her Marines practiced evacuation procedures and prepared defensive positions in case the Keltherans decided to take the wreckage by force. The mood in the facility shifted from pure scientific excitement to urgent determination as everyone realized that time was running out. The first successful test of a human-built prototype fighter incorporating Nexari technology took place on a Tuesday morning that would be remembered as a turning point in human history. The craft, designated Ghost Hawk, demonstrated limited phasing capabilities that allowed it to briefly disappear from sensors before returning to normal space. Captain Alex Rivera piloted the test flight and reported that the ship responded to his thoughts in ways that felt natural despite using technology from a dead civilization. The Ghost Hawk could accelerate faster than any human ship and maneuver in patterns that should have been impossible for something built with physical materials. The phasing system allowed it to avoid incoming fire by shifting into dimensions that conventional weapons could not reach. Alex described the experience as flying through dreams made solid. During the test flight, Alex detected Keltheran surveillance ships at the edge of the solar system, watching the human experiments with obvious interest. The Crystal Warriors were no longer pretending that their presence was coincidental, and their ships moved in formations that suggested preparation for military action rather than diplomatic observation. Chen analyzed the surveillance data and concluded that humanity had perhaps 6 months before the Keltherans would demand complete surrender of all Nexari technology. The Crystal Empire could not allow humans to develop capabilities that might challenge their dominance and would take action to prevent that outcome regardless of diplomatic consequences. Tony Garcia stood in the main laboratory surrounded by hybrid technologies that represented the fusion of human determination with alien innovation. The research team had accomplished something that should have taken decades and created weapons systems that could potentially match Keltheran military power. The question now was whether they could perfect their discoveries before their enemies decided to act. Jake Martinez received daily reports about the escalating tensions and knew that the peaceful research phase of the project was coming to an end. Soon humanity would need to decide whether to surrender their independence or use their new capabilities to fight for freedom. The Keltherans had given them Wreckage expecting it to humble human ambitions, but instead it had become the foundation for something that might change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. 2 years had passed since the Ghost Hawk test flight, and Admiral Frank Taylor now stood in a command center that did not officially exist on any human military record. The research project had evolved far beyond what anyone had imagined and now encompassed secret facilities scattered throughout the solar system like hidden pearls on an invisible string. Asteroid bases and stations on the dark sides of distant moons housed manufacturing, plants that produced technology the galaxy had never seen before. The human team had achieved something that the Keltherans considered impossible, and their success went far beyond simply understanding Nexari technology. Dr. Carol Jung had developed manufacturing processes that created adaptive armor systems capable of shifting between solid protection and energy dispersion in microseconds. These systems made ships nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons by automatically adjusting their defensive properties based on incoming threats. The centerpiece of human achievement was the Iron Shadow Phantom, and Admiral Taylor felt pride surge through him every time he looked at the massive dreadnought through the observation windows of the hidden command station. The ship represented everything humanity had learned about, combining their own engineering principles with Nexari innovation, and the result was something that surpassed both civilizations working separately. Unlike the original alien vessel, the Phantom was designed specifically for human crews and human psychology. Its corridors were sized for human proportions, and its interfaces responded to human thought patterns, while its weapons systems were calibrated for the way humans naturally approach tactical problems. The ship felt like a natural extension of its crew rather than a foreign tool they had to struggle to control. Captain Nick Roberts commanded the Phantom during its initial trials and worked closely with Navigator Helen Davis and Weapons Officer Greg Thompson to test systems that pushed the boundaries of what reality would allow. During combat simulations, they discovered that the ship responded to human emotions and instincts in ways that the original Nexari technology had never demonstrated with its creators. The vessel seemed to anticipate crew needs and reinforced weak armor sections automatically during battle while optimizing power distribution based on stress levels detected in human biometrics. The Phantom had become more than a ship built with alien technology and had evolved into something that was uniquely human despite using principles discovered in ancient Wreckage. The Shadow Fleet grew in secret as dozens of smaller vessels took shape in hidden shipyards that moved constantly through asteroid fields to avoid detection. Each ship incorporated lessons learned from the Phantom project and represented improvements over previous designs. These vessels formed the foundation of what Admiral Taylor designated humanity's first interdimensional naval force. The ships existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that conventional sensors could not detect. They could phase between realities at will and attack from angles that enemy forces could never anticipate or defend against. The Shadow Fleet represented a completely new form of warfare that operated by rules no other species had ever encountered. Security became increasingly difficult to maintain as the project expanded, and Keltheran agents led by Intelligence Director Kexmore began infiltrating human colonies with systematic precision. Several research outposts were destroyed in what the Crystal Warriors claimed were industrial accidents, but which showed clear signs of sabotage by forces with advanced technology. Garcia narrowly escaped an assassination attempt on Mars station when Keltheran agents tried to eliminate him with a bomb designed to look like an equipment malfunction. The explosion killed 3 human technicians and destroyed months of research, but failed to stop the rapid progress of human development. If anything, the attack only made the research teams more determined to succeed. The Keltherans were clearly becoming desperate as reports reached them about human capabilities that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. Ambassador Zektal abandoned all pretense of diplomacy and began making direct threats about the consequences of continued human experimentation with dangerous alien technology. Merle Taylor received intelligence reports indicating that the Keltheran Empire was mobilizing military forces throughout their territory and positioning fleets at strategic points around human space. The Crystal Warriors were preparing for what they considered a necessary intervention to prevent humanity from developing capabilities that could threaten galactic stability. The ultimatum arrived on a Tuesday morning and was delivered with the cold precision that characterized all Keltheran communications. Ambassador Zektal announced that humanity had 48 hours to surrender all Nixari artifacts and submit to permanent Keltheran oversight of human technological development. The alternative was what he called corrective military action that would reduce human civilization to a level appropriate for their species. Admiral Taylor called an emergency meeting with the senior staff of the Shadow Fleet project, and they gathered in the main conference room of the hidden command station. The room overlooked the construction bays where the Iron Shadow Phantom waited alongside its escort, vessels like sleeping giants ready to wake up and change the course of galactic history. President Maria Rodriguez authorized the deployment of the Shadow Fleet after consulting with military advisors who confirmed that humanity had no conventional forces capable of resisting a full Keltheran invasion. The decision to reveal their secret weapons came with the knowledge that failure would mean the complete destruction of human independence and possibly human civilization itself. Captain Roberts received orders to prepare the Phantom for combat operations and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. His ship represented the culmination of human ingenuity and determination, but it had never been tested against the military might of an empire that had conquered the galaxy. Everything humanity had worked for would be decided in the coming battle. The Shadow Fleet began moving into position as the Keltheran ultimatum countdown continued its relentless march towards zero. 37 human vessels prepared to face over 200 Keltheran warships in a battle that would determine whether humanity would remain free or become another conquered species serving crystal. Masters Admiral Taylor stood in the command center and watched his fleet prepare for the fight of their lives. The Keltherans had given humanity Wreckage, expecting it to serve as a lesson about the futility of challenging their power. Instead, the broken alien ship had become the foundation for weapons that could potentially defeat the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known. The Iron Shadow Phantom powered up its reality-bending engines and prepared to phase into normal space near Earth orbit. Captain Roberts and his crew knew they were about to face impossible odds, but they also knew they carried weapons that operated by rules their enemies had never encountered. The next few hours would determine whether human innovation could triumph over alien arrogance, and whether freedom was worth fighting for against overwhelming odds. The Keltheran ultimatum expired at exactly noon Earth time, and the massive fleet of crystalline warships that had positioned itself around humanity's home world began moving into attack formation. Admiral Kethaval commanded from the flagship dominance and broadcast a final message that echoed across all human communication channels with the cold authority of a species that had never known defeat in over 1,000 years of galactic conquest. The Crystal Admiral's words were simple and carried the weight of absolute certainty about the outcome of the coming battle. Humanity would surrender all Nexari technology immediately and submit to permanent Keltheran oversight, or their civilization would be reduced to radioactive ash floating in the void of space. The choice belonged to the humans, and they had exactly 10 minutes to make their decision before the bombardment began. President Maria Rodriguez stood in the emergency command center deep beneath the rocky mountains and felt the weight of her species' survival pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. She looked at Admiral Taylor through the secure communication link and gave the authorization that would either save humanity or ensure their destruction. The Shadow Fleet was cleared for immediate deployment against impossible odds. Captain Roberts stood on the bridge of the Iron Shadow Phantom and felt the ship respond to his presence, like a living thing that had been waiting for this moment since its construction began. The massive dreadnought began phasing into normal space near Earth orbit, and its appearance sent shockwaves through the Keltheran fleet that had been expecting to face primitive human vessels, armed with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. The Phantom materialized like a ghost, becoming solid, and its hull reflected light in ways that hurt to look at directly. The ship was larger than any human vessel had ever been, and moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something built from metal and energy. Behind it, 36 escort vessels phased into reality and took positions that formed a three-dimensional battle formation extending through multiple layers of space-time. Admiral Kethaval stared at the human fleet through the quantum viewing systems of his flagship and felt something he had not experienced in centuries of military service. The emotion took him several seconds to identify, and when he finally recognized it, the knowledge sent cold fear through his crystalline nervous system. He was looking at ships that operated by principles his civilization had never encountered, and suddenly, the outcome of this battle was no longer certain. The Keltheran fleet numbered over 200 vessels, and each one was a masterpiece of crystal technology that had been perfected through millennia of conquest. Their weapons could shatter planets, and their shields had never been penetrated by any force the galaxy had produced. The Crystal Warriors had defeated every species they had ever encountered, and their military doctrine was based on overwhelming firepower. Applied with surgical precision, Captain Roberts ordered the Reality Ripper to begin charging and felt the Phantom's primary weapon system draw power from dimensions that existed parallel to normal space. The weapon created tears in the fabric of reality itself and could erase targeted vessels from existence by removing them from all possible timelines. Human engineers had taken Nexari phasing technology and weaponized it in ways that the original aliens had never imagined. The battle began when Admiral Kethvale ordered his fleet to open fire with concentrated energy beams that should have vaporized any human ship instantly. The crystalline weapon struck the Phantom's hull and passed harmlessly through the vessel as it phased out of normal space for a split second before returning to reality. The human dreadnought had allowed the enemy attack to pass through its position as if the ship was made of shadows and dreams. Commander Pete Wilson led a squadron of 12 fighter craft that phased directly through the hulls of Keltheran cruisers and materialized inside the enemy vessels like deadly ghosts appearing in solid matter. His pilots, including Ace Victoria Lee and veteran Steve Miller, began attacking the crystal ships from within their own hulls and demonstrated tactics that no Keltheran commander had ever seen or prepared to defend against. The human fighters moved through the internal corridors of enemy ships while remaining partially phased and fired weapons that could strike targets in normal space while the shooters remained in parallel dimensions. Victoria Lee destroyed the main reactor of a Keltheran battleship by firing her weapon from inside the reactor chamber while existing in a dimension where the chamber walls could not stop. Her Admiral Kethval watched his carefully, ordered battle formation collapse into chaos as human ships appeared and disappeared at will while striking from angles that should have been impossible. The Keltherans had built their military doctrine around controlling space through superior firepower, but the humans were fighting a three-dimensional battle that extended through multiple phases of reality simultaneously. The Phantom demonstrated capabilities that violated every known law of physics as it appeared in several locations at once and fired the Reality Ripper at targets throughout the Keltheran fleet. Each shot from the human weapon simply erased an enemy vessel from existence without explosion or debris as the targeted ship ceased to exist. Across all possible timelines, Captain Roberts felt the ship respond to his tactical instincts and emotions as the battle progressed and realized that the Phantom was learning from each engagement. The vessel's adaptive systems analyzed Keltheran weapons and tactics in real time and developed countermeasures that made the human ship increasingly difficult to target or damage. The turning point came when Admiral Kethval attempted to ram the Phantom with his massive flagship in a desperate move to destroy the impossible human vessel through direct collision. The Dominance accelerated to ramming speed and struck the Phantom's position at the moment when Captain Roberts ordered his ship to phase out of normal space. The Keltheran flagship passed harmlessly through the Phantom's phased position, and Admiral Kethval felt his confidence shatter as completely as his battle plan. When the human dreadnought rematerialized, it was directly behind the Dominance, and Captain Roberts ordered the Reality Ripper fired at point-blank range into the Crystal Admiral's command bridge. The destruction of the Keltheran flagship sent shockwaves through the remaining enemy fleet as ships that had maintained perfect formation for over 1,000 years suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that operated by completely different rules of warfare. The Crystal Warriors began attempting to retreat, but discovered that human ships could pursue them through hyperspace and attack from dimensions the Keltherans had considered their exclusive domain. The route became complete as Keltheran vessels fled in all directions while Shadow Fleet ships hunted them through multiple layers of reality. Only 17 enemy ships escaped to carry word of the impossible defeat back to their empire while the rest were destroyed or captured by human forces that seemed able to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Admiral Taylor broadcast a message to the fleeing Keltheran vessels that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. His words were simple, but carried the weight of a species that had turned apparent defeat into overwhelming victory through determination and innovation. The Crystal Empire had given humanity wreckage, and humans had transformed it into something the galaxy would never forget. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy had changed in ways that no species could have predicted, and the ripple effects of humanity's impossible victory continued spreading through star systems that had known only Keltheran dominance for over 1,000 years. Admiral Nick Roberts stood on the bridge of the Iron Shadow Phantom and watched through quantum viewing screens as his expanded shadow fleet patrolled human space with ships that existed partially outside normal reality. The fleet had grown to over 300 vessels, and each one represented an improvement over the designs that had first shocked the Crystal Empire into defeat. Human engineers continued innovating and adapting Nexari technology in ways that pushed the boundaries of what the universe would allow. New ships phased through dimensions that even the ancient aliens had never discovered, and carried weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics in localized areas of space. Dr. Lisa Chen now held the title of Director of Xenoarchaeological Applications and oversaw research teams that had found additional Nexari sites throughout human territory. Each discovery provided new insights into the long-dead civilization and more importantly revealed that humans were developing innovations that surpassed even the original creators of the technology they had inherited as wreckage. The Keltheran Empire faced internal rebellions as subjugated species learned that the invincible crystal warriors could be defeated by primitives who had barely achieved interstellar travel. Worlds that had submitted to Keltheran rule for centuries began declaring independence, and the Empire's resources were stretched thin as they fought to maintain control over territories that no longer feared their military. Might Ambassador Zektel had been executed by his own government for the failure that led to the Empire's first military defeat in recorded history. His replacement was a younger crystal warrior named Thekros, who spent his time trying to negotiate peace treaties with species that had once begged for Keltheran mercy. The tables had turned, and the galaxy's former masters found themselves pleading for consideration from rebels they had previously crushed without thought. New alien civilizations emerged from the shadows where they had hidden during the long years of crystal dominance, and many sought either alliance with humanity or conquest of the weakened Keltheran territories. The Vorth hegemony sent diplomatic missions while secretly planning invasion routes through human space, and the machine intelligence known as the Convergence began probing human defenses with self-replicating scout units. Captain Alex Rivera had fully recovered from his early injuries during the development phase and now commanded the newest addition to the Shadow Fleet called the Iron Shadow Wraith. The vessel could exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously and demonstrated capabilities that made the original Phantom look primitive by comparison. His navigator, Ellen Carter, and her crew operated systems that allowed them to attack targets in the past and future while remaining safely anchored in the present. The human approach to Nexari technology had proven superior to the original aliens because humans partnered with their tools rather than trying to dominate them. Where the Crystal Empire saw technology as a means of control, and the ancient Nexari had attempted to force their discoveries to obey rigid commands, humans worked with adaptive systems that evolved and improved through cooperation. Intelligence reports revealed that other species throughout the galaxy were attempting to reverse engineer human innovations, but their efforts failed because they could not replicate the unique partnership between human psychology and Nexari adaptability. The technology required a specific mindset that valued flexibility over control and innovation over tradition. Dr. Tony Garcia continued, developing hybrid systems that combined human creativity with alien physics. In his latest projects involved ships that could create pocket universes for manufacturing and weapons that fired concentrated possibility rather than energy or matter. The research had moved far beyond simple reverse engineering and entered realms of science that had no names because no species had ever explored them before. The Vorth hegemony made their move 6 months after the Keltheran defeat by sending a massive invasion fleet through the outer territories of human space. Their ships were larger than Keltheran vessels and used organic technology that could adapt and heal from damage, while their weapons fired living projectiles that evolved during flight to counter defensive measures. Admiral Roberts led the Shadow Fleet against the Vorth invasion and demonstrated that human tactical innovation had not stopped. With the defeat of the Crystal Empire, his ships used reality phasing to attack the organic vessels from inside their own cellular structure, while weapons that fired concentrated entropy aged enemy hulls by centuries in seconds. The Vorth commanders discovered that their adaptive organic technology was useless against enemies who could exist in multiple timelines simultaneously and strike from dimensions where biological systems could not function. The invasion fleet was destroyed in less than 3 hours, and the surviving Vorth ships fled back to their territory carrying stories about humans who fought wars across multiple layers of existence. The Convergence Machine intelligence attempted a more subtle approach by infiltrating human computer systems with digital entities designed to take control of Shadow Fleet vessels from within their own navigation computers. The artificial beings discovered that human ships were protected by Nixari adaptive systems that treated digital invaders as viruses and developed countermeasures in real time. Human colonies spread across the galaxy, protected by Shadow Fleet vessels that shimmered between dimensions like guardian spirits watching over their charges. Each settlement carried the knowledge and technology that had transformed humanity from a primitive species receiving alien charity into the galaxy's most feared military power. Admiral Roberts often stood in the observation deck of the Iron Shadow Phantom and looked out at views that spanned multiple dimensions of spacetime. Through quantum windows, he could see human ships patrolling trade routes and protecting colonies, while alien species that had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant now spoke their names with respect and fear. The final irony of the Keltheran gift became clear as the months passed and human influence continued expanding throughout the galaxy. The Crystal Empire had presented the Nixari Wreckage as a lesson about the futility of challenging their dominance, but had instead provided the seeds of their own defeat and the foundation for a new galactic order. The ancient Nixari had failed because they fought their enemies using conventional tactics and tried to match Keltheran strengths with superior technology. Humanity succeeded by creating entirely new rules for warfare and developing capabilities that operated outside the normal understanding of military science. As Admiral Roberts watched the Phantom phase into hyperspace for another patrol mission, he reflected on how far his species had traveled from the day when alien wreckage had been dumped on Luna Station like cosmic garbage. The Keltherans had expected humans to be grateful for scraps, but instead humanity had built something unprecedented that proved the universe belonged not to the strongest or oldest species, but to those bold enough to transform gifts of broken metal into instruments of freedom that would echo through eternity.